welcome to our special press conference to discuss GPL budget cut. With us this morning we have Mr. Winston Brassington, our chairman of the board of directors, Mr. Bharat Dindyal, our chief executive officer, and Mr. Eshwar Deonarine, our deputy chief executive officer. We have also Ms. Lorianne Bancroft, our corporate secretary. This morning, I would like to invite Mr. Brassington to make his first presentation, followed by Mr. Dindyal, then followed by Mr. Eshwar Deonarine.
Good morning and welcome to GPL's boardroom. This press conference is to discuss the implications of the budget cuts that were delivered to GPL in Parliament by the opposition last Thursday. As you're all aware, GPL was cut by 5.2 billion in terms of its capital budget. And we wanted to discuss with you, let you know what are the possible repercussions, the implications of these cuts. Essentially, what are the options available to us? First, we have an option to increase tariffs, and I'll talk more to this. Secondly, we can cut our capital program. Most of the funds cut were earmarked for our capital program, and the CEO will speak more to what's going on there. Thirdly, we can shift resources around. We can take resources from our operational side and put it into our capital program. But that has consequences too. And finally, we can reduce cost and generate some more funds, but that has consequences. If I could speak a little bit to each of those. As all of you know, GPL is a regulated utility. We are entitled every year to submit to the PUC a calculation which shows what our revenues have been for the previous year, what our costs are, and there is a very detailed prescribed formula that allows GPL to either receive an increase in tariffs or a reduction in tariffs. Now, for many years now, GPL has been suppressing the tariffs, largely because it would be entitled to obtain a significant increase given the increase in oil prices over recent years. For this year, when we looked at it in January, we would have been entitled, based on last year's performance, to charge an increase in tariffs of 20.58%. This is a similar number to what you would have heard in previous years. We did not seek to do that, but we instead sought support from the government for financing through the budget. Unfortunately, part of this financing has been slashed, and so this is now a very real option that we have to consider. Within the next few weeks, we will submit to the PUC what is called a final return certificate, which will show what we are entitled to charge based on our audited accounts in terms of an increase. And we will have to tell the PUC whether we want to implement any or part of this increase. In the past, we've been doing these filings, but we haven't been seeking an increase. We've simply said, this is what we're entitled to. And we have said, we will not implement an increase. And so because of those actions over the years, GPL has accumulated something called foregone revenue. And this is basically the unearned revenue that we've accumulated from foregoing or deferring tariff increases. And the current balance that stands at is $27 billion. So we have accumulated $27 billion in foregone revenue, which essentially is the revenue that we have given up or deferred by not implementing tariff increases. The last time we had a tariff increase was early 2008, and you would recall it was 6, 9, and 15%. 6 for the vulnerable residential, 9 for the other residentials, 15% for commercial and industrial, and government took a 20%. But we haven't implemented any more increases since then. Fuel prices have moved dramatically. In the last 6 to 7 years, GPL's fuel bill has moved from little over $60 million US to now $120 million US, $24 billion. So we've held on passing on tariff increases. Today, when you look at where GPL tariffs compare to the rest of the region, we sit near to the lowest. There is a table that the Prime Minister showed recently of 17 Caribbean countries and the rates, and we're fourth from the bottom. Suriname, Trinidad, and the Bahamas are below us. And one of the reasons that is so is because in many of the other countries, they have passed on the increase in cost, because we're all pretty much primarily dependent on fossil fuels. Suriname has hydro, but we're all primarily dependent on fossil fuels, and those prices have moved. But we have kept our prices. And so this is what the consequence may be. We may have to increase tariffs. We have been holding it. We've been suppressing it. We are entitled to do it. We have been following the procedure and paper of filing with the PUC what we're entitled to. We have been accumulating and showing in our audited accounts the value of that foregone revenue, which now stands at $27 billion. But we have not implemented that increase. The government has opted to seek support through Parliament for us to carry out to fund our operational deficit and to fund our capital program. Let's talk a little bit about our capital program. The monies that were coming to GPL that were cut is essentially to fund our capital program. And GPL prepares, as a regulated utility, a 5-year investment plan called the Development and Expansion Plan. And we set out in that plan all of the investments that we need to make, be it generation, transmission, distribution, commercial, loss reduction activities, replacing meters, improving the network. That's set out. That's a public document. The PUC comments in it, and we are bound by that. So the capital investment that we're looking at for GPL is part and parcel of that D&E plan. Now, for many years, we have deferred implementing our capital program because given that we are 100% owned by the government, our sources of funding is largely from the shareholder. We have not exercised the option, or at a very limited level, of going out and borrowing from the commercial banks at market rates, because that would be much higher than borrowing from government at 1 or 2%. The monies that were earmarked for GPL, the $10.2 billion, of which $5.2 billion was slashed, was coming from 3 funding sources. First, continuation of the Chinese Import-Export Bank, and those funds come to the government at 2% on long-term tenors. Secondly, the IADB, again at concessionary rates. And then the Petro-Carib, again concessionary. Concessionary rates is essentially 1 or 2% with long repayment periods, usually 20 to 40 years, with moratoriums on repayment. And the government has opted to use these concessional resources to fund GPL's capital program. Now, it's not easy to seek concessional resources and obtain it. They've been doing that. These funds, when they're provided to GPL, they come through an on-lending agreement, and GPL has an obligation to repay that over the long term. So you would look at our audited accounts, and you will see all of these shareholder loans. So all of these funds were coming from identified third-party sources of funding at concessional rates. So again, it doesn't make sense why they would just cut it. Some of the programs are ongoing. You know, you've known for some time that we have this Chinese project. This is a multi-year program. The funding doesn't get given to GPL up front. It's given to us on an annual basis that we need. They didn't identify where the cuts would come from. They just said 5.2 billion gone. So it's difficult. Now, what do we do? You know the saying, cash is fungible. We, within GPL and within government, they separate between operating support and capital support. But at the end of the day, cash is cash. You can choose to basically invest in new meters or pay for fuel. These are choices that you have. So this may be one choice that we have. Instead of putting money into what is earmarked maintenance programs, right? We shift those resources to these capital programs. But that has consequences on the quality of supply, on the availability of supply. And lastly, we can cut cost. We spend $2.5 billion on wages. We have maintenance investments that we expense. We have fuel. We can choose, don't put as much into fuel. Don't put as much into wages and salaries. In fact, a good portion of our workforce is involved in maintenance and capital investment activities. Rebuilding our network. We utilize our employees. So if you don't have money for that, you have people who are sitting around basically without the matching resources, materials and so on to do their work. Right? So this has consequences from that perspective. So this is the background and the perspective that we face. And this year we had projected part of the funds for our preparatory work for Myla. You know, I'll be very frank with you. In seeking to close a Myla, it has been identified that GPL needs to invest to improve the company's position, ensuring we have adequate infrastructure and network, reducing losses, but these things take investment. And it's been recognized that we have not been giving GPL the resources it needs. And so part of our commitments that we are looking to make with the IDB is that the government as shareholder will stand behind GPL's required capital investment program. For many years, we've produced D&E plans, but most of it never happens because of a shortage of resources. In the last 5 to 7 years, the bulk of our investment has been building new generating plants to ensure we don't have blockouts and to catch up with demand. Linking our infrastructure so that we have one integrated grid and that when the hydro comes in, we can take it. A lot of our investments today now are moving to the loss reduction activities, which requires massive investment in remetering and building a new distribution network. And those who are looking to GPL to basically ensure that we pay for the obligations on the Mile Falls want to ensure that you're being run as a utility with adequate resources. And because we're solely owned by the government, these are coming from government, instead of us going and borrowing it commercially. Because anything you borrow, you have to repay. The higher the interest rate, the more you have to repay. So part of the investment that we're making is also to ensure that we are adequately prepared for the hydro. And we have a high degree of confidence that we will achieve financial close by the end of this year. All right, there are other monies in the budget that's earmarked for our investment in the hydro, and that's coming up for discussion. So a lot of this will directly affect how well we are preparing to fulfill our obligations to receive the hydro. And so I want to stop there, having given you that perspective, and ask the CEO to go in to a little bit on what these funds were going to be used for specifically. Bharat?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like our chairman said, the cuts which were effected last week, in fact, were intended for capital programs. But I was thinking, having read the AFC column in the Kaiju News yesterday, whether it might not be better to basically do the response in context. Because as I read this, I'm seriously disappointed. And I'm disappointed because, you know, these major decisions are being made in total ignorance. And when I say in total ignorance, I want to read directly from what was written in yesterday's Kaiju News. Consumers are being led to believe by the, and this is a part of it, are being led to believe by the outrageous propaganda on NCN and government radio that a reduction of the allocation will be the cause of increased blackouts, or blackouts that we should say more blackouts. The fact of the matter is that over 30% of electricity generated by GPL is lost along its transmission system. Now, I'm sure that everybody who's here from the media knows differently. But this is a party basically that has taken action out of this complete misunderstanding of what losses are and where GPL losses are assigned. Prime Minister took the time in his presentation last Tuesday to say that our total losses of 31% are made up of 14% technical losses, which is what they speak to here, and 17% non-technical losses. So when they say, and in fact they went on to say that if we're basically generating 300 kilowatts of power, 100 kilowatt never reaches the customer. So the ignorance, the misunderstanding, the poor understanding of what GPL is and what we do basically is being used, I think, to make decisions which are coming back to hurt all of us. In fact, it went on to say that last year the National Assembly withheld approval for $1 billion, and that this $1 billion was eventually given to GPL, but nothing apparently was spent on our transmission and distribution. Now, Prime Minister, justification in Parliament for the $6 billion subvention last year said we're going to buy fuel with it. Are they saying that we should go to Parliament and say we want to use the money to buy fuel and then turn around and use it for some other purpose? I don't know, and I don't know whether that's ethical. In fact, there are some other statements here which I think basically continue to address and I mean highlight the level of misunderstanding of what GPL is. Now, where we are currently, the main programs which we are currently implementing, the infrastructure development project. And in fact, I was going to show you a picture of the progress of works at some of these substations. Now, that is cut. We have 7 new substations in various stages, in fact, most of them in various stages of completion, some as far as 85% complete. In fact, this morning we received notification from the contractor that the new Sophia substation is ready for commissioning. Imagine at this stage you're saying, sorry, you're not going to receive any money to complete these facilities. The 26 megawatt power plant at Breeden Hoop. We have already expended large sums on this $32 million US project. The foundation works are in progress right now. All the equipment is sitting in Finland, waiting on us to queue them to be shipped to Guyana. Do we abandon this project at this time? The frequency conversion at Kingston. We are spending $7.2 million US to convert 4 5.5 megawatt machines. 2 of those machines have been converted already and the commissioning has already started. Do we abandon the project now? The network conversion. We are now left with just 12 megawatts of 50 hertz load that we have to convert to 60 hertz. And this has to be done in time for the completion of the plant conversion. Do we abandon these projects now? Now, the fact of the matter is, the parties who are making these cuts, do they understand the stage in which these projects have progressed, to which they have progressed? And do they understand the implications for GPL? The technical losses, let me speak to that we are talking about, and in fact there was some frustration being exhibited by the parties as to the progress the GPL is making. The frequency conversion that we are doing in Georgetown now is a loss reduction project. The infrastructure development work that the Chinese are doing is a loss reduction project. The metering program that is being cut this year is a loss reduction project. So if you're basically chopping us off at the knees where the investment to reduce losses are concerned, how could you rightfully ask, what are you doing about losses? So I think these things are basically out of ignorance. They might say it is lack of information, but it is out of ignorance. The information that Prime Minister provided in Parliament, for me, is adequate. For the other parties, I think they don't know what they're hearing. They absolutely don't know what they're hearing. So when they think they don't have information, they have the information, it's just that they don't understand it. But let me go back a bit to the history of GEC GPL. I came into this business in 1987. I joined the GEC in 1987. In 1987, the average age of GPL generating equipment was over 22 years. So there was nothing in the GPL system as far as generation goes that you could have relied on. The distribution system, the GC had no money to import materials. For 3 days of the week, workers were scavenging materials from bits and pieces all over the place. And the last 2 days, Thursday and Friday, they did repair work. We came from a system like that in 1992. And from 1992 to now, in Georgetown alone, in the DMR system, they've been invested in 80.3 megawatts of new generating capacity. We have spent over 30-odd million US in distribution networks to connect over almost 50,000 new customers in over 400 communities. We sit here in 2013 and people are asking, what did we do with the $6 billion that were given last year? Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you're running a taxi service and you're spending $10 million in fuel this year, and next year you see you have to spend $15 million of fuel. And somebody said, I'm going to give you the $5 million, but improve the service. Could you improve your service if you're just covering costs? You can't. You know what would improve the service? Is another taxi. Is a bigger vehicle, is a better vehicle. And what we're doing in GPL is that we have to necessarily improve the infrastructure at the same time we have to expand it to basically cater for the thousands of households that are building houses every year, building homes every year. We have to cater for that expansion. And we've been building networks, but we have also been investing in generation to meet the increased demand. So I'm looking at all of this, and in fact, we are wondering basically what we do next, because the transmission program, which is affected by the cut, was on the cards in the 70s. Since the 70s into the mid-80s, transmission lines between number 53 Village and Canefield, between Canefield and Antwerp were completed, but the link between Antwerp and Sophia was never done. But it was on the card since then. Now 30-odd years later, we are almost there. We have the money, or most of it at least. The contract is here, and the work is about to start. In fact, a lot of it is preliminary works have already been done, and we're told, sorry, you can't continue it. You don't need to continue it. We're not convinced that there is a need for it possibly. And so stand still where you were 30-something years ago. These things have no logic to them. They have no logic to them because I don't know that any of these decisions are informed by a basic knowledge of what GPL is, what we are doing. So we basically can't build a link between Sophia, the Demerara and Berbice systems. So the Berbice people basically cannot benefit from additional capacity which we want to put in Demerara. In fact, even the additional capacity which we want to put in Demerara, which has to help the Berbice system, the 26 megawatt plant, is also frustrated. So we can't generate additional power by the end of this year. We can't link to Berbice. Berbice basically, the crisis in Berbice continues. Demerara would run into trouble next year because our peak now is 87 megawatts, and we have a Wärtsilä capacity, a reliable capacity in Demerara of 80.3 megawatts. So by next year, we run into trouble in Demerara because we just don't have enough reliable capacity. So Demerara is affected. Berbice is in trouble because we can bring no improvement to them. The people in the central quarantine, where we intended to build a new substation to improve power quality, continue to suffer. We can't do these things, but the same people are going to come next year and say, what improvements have you brought? So, we are basically in a very difficult position. We are in a very difficult position. What do you do? Like the chairman said, there are options open to us. Do we continue the capital program at the expense of reducing service as we know it now? Why are we getting load shedding now? Is it because we are not buying fuel? Prime Minister took some time to say we are now constructing new facilities in a live environment. We have a substation at Sophia which was built in the 70s, which is serving over 60,000 customers, and we are expanding it, and we have to do construction in proximity to live 69,000 volt systems. How do you do that? Do you call somebody to your house and tell them completely rewire the house, but I don't want any part of the house to be out of power? Are you being realistic? We have to build transmission lines up the East Coast. We have to build transmission lines going to South Georgetown. We only have certain routes that are suitable for electricity transmission. And along those routes, we already have existing lines. We have to go and move those lines out of the way, continue to provide power to customers, and build a transmission line in parallel with existing systems. How do you do that without outages? So, while I'm terribly disappointed because I think when these serious decisions are made, if you basically say that, in my mind, the questions which I am asking are not properly addressed, then I think it is more prudent to try to get answers to those questions before you take this drastic action. Because when we think we're moving forward in GPL, we basically are caught in a position where you're almost there, but you're not there. What are you going to do next? And the question is this: if the politicians feel they're not satisfied, and so they're not prepared to basically approve these sums to come in to improve system, why is the IDB that has the expertise, that has been with GPL for over 30 years, continues to invest? Why are they putting money into loss reduction if they are of the opinion, or anybody who's better informed is of the opinion that they're just a waste of time? If you're wasting the money, why the IDB is continuing to pour money into GPL? If they figure we don't know what we're doing or where we're going. I mean, that's a pertinent question. And I want to address this issue of management. You know, I've heard, and in fact in Prime Minister's press conference the other day, a question was asked, the GPL management is no good, why should we put money into them? And I know persons basically benefited from a report, a study that was done by a consultant out of the UK. He came here, he had to do due diligence study, and part of it had to deal with GPL capacity. And you know what he said? That executive management on this company are under serious pressure. Why? because we have had serious loss of skills over the years, and the people who have to support the executive management don't have all the experience. In fact, as the system expands, they're saying there are areas where GPL just don't have the skills right now. And so they're saying that you need to bring in engineers and fix them, accountants, and put them in particular departments. The system control department or system planning and design department, in fact, in transmission and distribution, in loss reduction. They say these areas need to be strengthened because as we expand the system, as we look to invest in more infrastructure, our capacity to do certain things has to be reinforced. Right? And they recognize that I don't know of any company, large engineering company in this country, and for that matter in the Caribbean, that can stand up and say, brain drain hasn't affected us. I don't think any company can seriously say the brain drain in the Caribbean hasn't affected us. Right, so GPL in Guyana is no different. We have a brain drain problem. I kept saying we employed 41 graduate engineers in 2004, 2005. We got 5 right now. It's a serious problem. And the consultants are looking at it and they're saying, this is something that has to be addressed. And we said, could you come up with a solution to this brain drain problem? Nobody has a solution. Nobody has a solution to the brain drain problem. They're saying, could you look to other countries and see if you could import these exports? Well, we asked a colleague out of Brazil, and he sent us some rates. And the most junior engineers basically getting over 500,000 Guyana dollars, the most junior engineers. By the time we get to senior engineers, it is almost $1 million Guyana dollars. Right, so I also want to speak up about the management costs, which is also in this document, saying that 29 managers at GPL are earning an average of 10 million Guyana dollars a year, while we were paying over almost 800 million to 14 people previously.
Guyana
So,
dollars?
of course.
10 million Guyana dollars a year?
For 29 people, on average. On average. Not total, on average. But this is in this document. And apparently it was referenced to Mr. Ram. So basically look at that, and of course look at what obtained previously. When 14 positions, we were paying over $760 million. So the cost of operating the business of providing the management services now is a fraction of what it was before. 10 million by 29 is 290 million, madam. The average is 10. Yes, sir. That's what I was saying. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have to basically look and see, like the chairman says, what is everything that is here is a priority. We have to complete the 26 megawatt plant at Vidahu, because you know next year there will be serious consequences. We have to complete the frequency conversion. We're in the middle of it. All the equipment is here. The people are working at Kingston. The network conversion, we have imported over $5 million US in transformers, and they're sitting at the Sophia stores. We are doing an incremental conversion of the load, the network load. That has to continue. The infrastructure development works. It is intended to be completed at the end of this year. This is after 3 years of construction, of design, procurement, and construction. We are in the last phase of it. It is inconceivable that at this time we'll have to put this on ice. All right? The metering program, if we don't buy additional meters, our current stock of meters is less than 4,000. If we don't buy additional meters now, sometime later this year, we have to shut the doors on new services. We have to stop replacing defective meters. So, a question also was asked in Parliament, and Prime Minister said that 78% of GPL's revenues this year are intended to be expended on fuel alone. And of course, I mean, these debates, you know, is who have the last laugh. Because PPM Prime Minister was asked, how much is that in dollars? And he said 24.7 billion. Well, for me, you know, I'm an engineer. If somebody tells me that in a business I'm operating, 78% of my expense is for one item, and everybody knows what's the GPL reality. And the Minister of Finance responded that the GPL cost structure is unsustainable. 78% going this year for fuel and 14% going for employment. You tell me what's remaining if it's adequate to basically do repairs and maintenance and capital works. I mean, last year we said 83% went to fuel alone, 14% went to employment. 97% of your revenues are basically taken up by two expenses. Could we survive? If we're not getting capital injections, how do we manage this business? How do we basically continue to invest in upgrading what has been existing since the 70s and has been running at almost full capacity now? Where are we going? These harsh realities, this is not politics. This is the reality we face. This is not politics. Take the politics out of it. This is the reality we face. And I'm not sure where this reality has dawned on the people who are making these decisions. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think I should end it there. Thank you.
We are faced here with a paradox. Not only has this budget been slashed by 5.2 billion, the opposition was also asking for a reduction in tariffs. We don't have enough as it is, and you want to reduce tariffs. They seem also to forget that we have statutory targets to meet. If we fail to reach these targets, the PUC has the right to apply financial penalties against this company. We have earlier this year, a couple of weeks ago, the PUC had this hearing, which they are obligated to hold annually on GPL's operating standards and performance targets. In those targets, you have things like the average duration of an outage, the number of times you have the outages, and if you exceed those targets, then there are financial implications for the company, apart from the customer services. We also have customer services targets, the time you take to install a new meter. If you don't have the meters in stock, how can you reach the targets? And that's why the CEO said we may have to shut the doors on taking new applications, because if you don't have meters, you will reach the target. And there are financial penalties that we have to pay to the applicant. So I think the whole thing was taken out of context when these decisions were made. To improve the quality of service, to reduce losses, requires significant amount of money. And the electric utility industry is one of the most capital-intensive industries in the world. And this is a reality we have to deal with. Yes, when we talk about $5 or $6 or $10 billion, it seems to be a lot. But when you take it into the context of the electric utility industry, it is peanuts. And that is what I was saying, the decision was taken out of context. The irony is, we have been sharing all this information out to the public, to the opposition members, to our customers. We also have public hearings, which we want to disseminate information to people, so they understand the challenges we face. I don't want to get into all the financial implications. I think that has been dealt with both by the chairman and the CEO. So I think I'll maybe leave the door open now for questions. That's okay with you?
Yeah.
Yes. We'll take questions.
Imagine at this stage, basically, you're saying you can't finish this facility and put it to the use of over 20,000 customers who are going to benefit. Right? So this is heartbreaking to know that, I mean, after 35 years, you get to this stage, after 35 years, and then suddenly you're being told, sorry, stop right here. You know, it's like, You can understand. You know, there is no basically, in fact, there is no technical, if you want to come down, there is technically no justification. This is at Sophia, right behind our existing facility, right? This is a new control room for the modification we're doing to the existing Sophia control, in fact, the Sophia substation, which is, you can see on the right. Soon, our series of equipment, control panels are going to be installed in this building. And this building could be used to manage this new substation. Again, at this stage, imagine what you do if you're basically stuck in a position like that, where the panels are sitting in a container. They could be damaged by condensation because of our tropical conditions here. They have small dryers in them, but the dryers have been, they're designed for 6 months. And the equipment can't go in there because you can't expose it. It has to sit in the containers. The dryers basically will be exhausted. The condensation starts, and all the state-of-the-art electronic equipment is destroyed. And what you do? You can do nothing. All right. So I don't know if these realities are known. They're known by people. All right. But I just wanted to show you. In fact. This is also Sophia where, you see these cables? These are power cables which are serving consumers of the East Coast. That cable is providing power to almost 16,000 customers. And what we're trying to do here, live, this power cable has power. We're trying to move it out of the way for them to do new foundations. Right? So, there is an enormous amount of time, effort, sweat and tears that are going into these projects to try to ensure that we can do what we have to do by as far as possible reducing outages. This is the new substation in South Georgetown. Okay? If you go back up on that one. This one here would serve the whole of South Georgetown. All the consumers in Meadowbrook, South Ryanville, North Ryanville, Alexander Village, from East Bank up to Nandi Park. In fact, from Hatfield Street, between, if you look at Mandela Avenue, Hatfield Street, Water Street, going straight up to Rahaman Store, all those consumers will get power from that substation. All the equipment is here, they're doing the foundations, but guess what? We're going to have to stop right there. So when people start to complain about the reliability of the supply, the fact that we might have to eventually load shed people during the evening peak, after 30 odd years we are about here, but that's as far as we get. This is next to Diamond. You know all the development that's taking place on the East Bank, from Providence going right up to Diamond. Everybody knows the size of the Diamond housing scheme. This substation is right next door to Diamond and Golden Grove. Again, this is intended to improve the supply along the East Bank. This is where it is, and this is where it might probably stay. All right, so they are. In fact, I was hoping this is this is Columbia at Myconi, and this is the last drop-off point for power before it gets into Berbice. This is where this is. And I wanted to show you, in fact, I thought we had a photo of the Good Hope substation. The Good Hope substation is almost 90% complete. That's it. You see, that's Good Hope. You see the Good Hope substation? In fact, this is almost 90% complete. And this is going to improve service from Buxton coming right down to industry. Imagine we're 90%, and the last step basically to improve supply to all these consumers between collagen and industry would have to be put on hold.
With that being said, we'll take questions.
Being done now to be engaged in the opposition or whether the interested parties on addressing these cuts, having them enforced or some sort of assistance?
Well, first of all, I think like the chairman says, we don't have a position right now, a fixed position on what is going to be affected in GPL. We know that there's a massive cut.
Why don't you,
Oh, sorry.
why don't you switch points?
Yes.
Billion reduction in a capital allocation of 10.2 billion is significant. And the fact is, we basically have to sit now and decide what is the priority of the priorities. All right? Now, these capital works down here, like I was trying to emphasize, have advanced significantly. And it would be hard to basically say that we have to stop these programs where they are currently. The frequency conversion, we are almost 80% through the payments for of the 7.2 million US dollars. We have expended 90% of the monies for the network conversion. So what do you choose? Okay, the foundation works for the 26 megawatt plant. There is a 1.2 billion allocation in this year's budget for the foundation works. The contractors, they're working now. You know, we're having a severe difficulty in getting the 72-foot piles for the foundation, but we've come up with some solutions. We're ready to move forward. The equipment is sitting in Finland. The contractor is working feverishly to finish the foundations. Do you sacrifice that? Okay. We have, other than these projects, what are you left with? Cut the metering program. Cutting the metering program is going to affect people's access to new services. It's going to put a serious blow to our commercial loss reduction efforts. We can't change out meters. We basically can't do anything to improve the accuracy of our metering out there. We might have, obviously, to choose to deal with inaccurate meters and say, sorry, we can't take new services. Or as like the DCO said, we have customer service standards. As long as we take that application from you, we have a definite time by which we have to install your meter. And if we don't do it in the 14 days, we have to pay you every day to a certain amount. So, I don't know. I mean, if you're sitting in a situation and these are your options, do you see any easy call? There's no easy call. The other thing is that I'm not sure what could be done. What we're doing here is intended to disseminate information. We can't speak in Parliament. I mean, Prime Minister's tried his best. Prime Minister's had a press conference. He's written on this matter. We are releasing all this information with the intention that some of it gets to the ears of the people who matter on the other side. And they stop and they think, did we do the right thing? Should we come back and revisit this? Okay, so what we're doing here, I think, is very important because we're giving hard, factual information, incontrovertible facts, which we are hoping would be considered and considered seriously.
Alan Harris, sir, what is the size of foreign funding for GPL this year? And, I mean, how much? That's 25 million US they cut from the budget here. But you were saying that you could recover that 25 million by tariff increases. Why the reluctance, therefore, to increase tariff?
Well, first of all, the funding is all there from foreign sources at 1 or 2% on long-term rates. Of that 10 billion, all of it is foreign funded. The breakdown is you've got the Chinese Import-Export Bank, you've got the IDB, and you've got the Petro-Carib funds. All right? So all of the capital program for GPL was coming from foreign funded sources. Now, you don't typically increase tariffs to simply finance investment, especially when you have the option of borrowing those funds on a long-term basis, 20 to 40 years, at a peppercorn interest rate. You don't look to increase tariffs when you have that option. You would increase tariffs when you're fundamentally looking at your annual operating expenses being above your annual operating revenue. So these are expenditures required for expansion and improvement of efficiencies. Now, we were at a very difficult position because in preparing for the hydro, and I don't know how the hydro will fare this week with the LCDS and that debate, but what they're doing here indirectly will affect our ability to fulfill our commitments for the hydro. As I said to you, the lenders who are lending for the hydro want to ensure that the off-taker, the buyer of the power under the power purchase agreement, can ensure that it has a company that is adequately capitalized to be able to handle the hydro. So some of these investments are intended to ensure that all of what we've been putting on paper each year in our D&E plan, that we're actually going to do it this time. Right? Because you can't want to say, well, you're inefficient, but in order to fix that inefficiency, you need to invest massive sums, but we don't want to give you those funds. So tariff increases to fund this would not be your first choice. But if you don't have the funds, and we still have to maintain those commitments, it is going to be an option that we seriously have to look at. Now, tariff increases increase the cost of living for everybody. It hurts the competitiveness of businesses, it increases the cost of living, and so that is why since 2008, over 5 years ago, we have opted not to go that route, although we have that right. So I think it's very short-sighted of the opposition. I think they didn't give any explanation. There is an abundance of information in the public domain on all of what we're doing. Last month we had a public presentation all morning. We invited the public and the media. I think some of you were there. The PUC similarly had one. And so people forget that we are a regulated utility. I have, as Minister Singh said in the budget debate before the vote came, recognized that GPL has gone before the Economic Services Committee in the past. So if you have additional issues and questions, you can ask it there. We've gone before with the Prime Minister, the Economic Services Committee, to answer in-depth questions on GPL's performance, right? But we've been doing this publicly in many different ways. Last year we had a couple of public presentations in detail on GPL's performance. This year we've done that already. We have audited accounts, and those are clean audit opinions, right? How we receive and spend our money is accounted for. So it's very unfortunate. So we will have to make decisions. The question on priorities, some of our capital programs cannot be compromised. We have to go forward with that. So then we have the remaining programs. If we don't continue to invest, we are not going to be able to improve the efficiencies. Everyone is hitting us over the head on technical and commercial losses, but it requires massive investment. This $40 million transmission project, apart from improving voltage and stability and allowing us to move power from a few generating plants all across the country, this also helps to reduce technical losses, but it's only about 2%. Our technical losses is about 14%. The bulk of that reduction in technical losses will have to come from completely rebuilding our distribution network. So we have pilot programs to go into major areas now and completely rebuild new transformers, new conductors, But if we don't have those funds, we're going to have to push back. Or we may have to do it and increase tariffs. To fund the $5.2 billion loss, tariffs would have to go up by about 17%. So if we were to say part increase in tariffs, part reduce the capital program, part reduce cost in other areas, these are options, but we're only now dealing with it, and the Prime Minister last night issued a letter to Mr. Georgetown addressing a number of issues, and maybe before the budget estimates are finished, maybe they may want to go back and revisit this and give us back our funds. I mean, if that can be done, that'd be great. Otherwise, we'll have to deal with the consequences.
Quick follow-up, sir. I heard from somewhere that whenever you increase tariffs, electricity theft is also increased. Do you have an idea of the ratio of increasing electricity theft to tariff increases?
Well, the last time we increased tariffs in 2008, and the decline in technical and commercial losses decreased. So we've been stagnating at about 30 to 32%. We came 6 years ago from 42% down 44%. 7-8 years ago. But I think part of the reduction initially is you address the low-hanging fruit, the easy things to do. Now the more difficult things require substantial investment. But indeed you increase tariffs and losses go up because there's an incentive. You have to pay more, you want to try to, but we don't have statistics to say what it is.
Gentlemen, I'm not sure who will address it. Could you give us a brief breakdown on GPL's income, say maybe for the past 3 to 5 years, as against expenditure?
You want to go, Ash? In 2010, it was 26.5 billion. In 2009, it was 23.9 billion. In 2008, 22 billion. In 2007, 19.8 billion. In 10 years, our revenues increased by about 50. In 7 years, less than 7 years, our revenue has gone from 19 billion to 29 billion. This year, we're looking at about 31 billion. We've seen a 50% increase in revenue, and this is only after a 10 to 15% increase in 2008. So the bulk of the rest of the increase is coming from growth in supply. We have in the last 7 years increased the number of customers by 40,000. 1/3. All of these new connections in new areas, and they don't get disconnected for free. It takes massive investments to connect these people to the grid. You've got to build out the network. You've got to put in more transformers, more conductors, more meters, everything to connect those people. So there's a significant cost. We've been averaging 5,000 to 10,000 new customers in the grid in the last few years. In the last 3 years, 1 year was almost 10,000. Last year, I think, was a little over 6,000. So there is an increasing demand, which is why we've been building all these new generating plants. In the last 7 years, we've invested over 90 million in new generation alone. So our revenue is growing, but I'll give you some stats on our fuel. In 2006, our fuel bill was $60 million US. Today it's $120 million US. It's doubling.
Expenses was $22.5 billion. 2008 sales revenue.
So we would have to honor whatever is there, but that takes away money from other activities, including fuel or maintenance. But the bigger issue that we have to consider is a good part of our workforce is there to implement some of these capital programs. So if we don't have if you don't have the meters or you don't have the lines to build, then do you need all of these people? So that's an issue that we have to face with or without the arbitration ruling. That is, do we have enough work to utilize all of these people? Because labor is only part of it when you're talking about capital projects. You have to have the materials. If you're rebuilding networks and you're doing it in-house, and we do a fair bit of that in-house, or you're changing meters, or connecting new customers, then you have people standing by to provide those services. And those people have to be paid. So if you no longer have the materials to do it, you may have to say, adjust the workforce accordingly until we need those people again. It's an option. I'm not saying we're gonna, but it's a real reality when you don't have the money.
But the minimum cost to you, according to some argument, was $1.5 billion, am I right?
The minimum cost.
If the arbitration ruling goes against GPL, the billion risk wages, the cost to the
No.
You have information, we just $2.5 billion. We offered, is it 5%, right? We offered 5%. So that's 100 and something million a year. So depending, yeah.
3%.
I don't want to give a number. You
think it would be 3%?
I don't. I thought these are.
Then you have to cut operating expenses. Do we not service the machines?
Imperative that the opposition understand what GPL has to face with financially in order to get these projects completed. Wait and see what might be the results. Thank you.
You can make some black yard and make them want to protest it.
We don't want to do that.
No. I mean, I know you're accustomed to holding a placard, madam.